Okay, we are live on Facebook as well. Okay, so welcome to everyone on Zoom. Um, Today, we are going to discuss something that I believe Leah did study with the woman during the Torah and Tea, at least the concept, but not into detail. We're going to talk about today how to develop a good eye. You know, like when whoever plays baseball, you know, to develop a good eye is the key to be a good player. You got to be someone who can see the ball. Hi, Laura. Someone who can see the ball at the right time, swing at the right time. You got to have a good eye. Now, what is having a good eye? How does developing a good eye help us in our lives? So let me tell you what I think can be very, very helpful. This is going to be more of a class that will speak about some positivity things, and I think we'll be able to connect it very much to last week's class about judging people favorably, a super important lesson that Judaism teaches us. So let's go ahead with what we have right here. So let me start off with one of the greatest sages in the era of the Talmud. His name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was the leader of the Jewish people, and he once sent his students out into the world to discover what would be the best advice they can get for living a righteous and a fulfilling life. So when one of his students came back, his name was Rabbi Eliezer, he returned from his travels, and he comes back and he says, I have searched, I have found that the best advice is to develop an ayin tov, a good eye. When your eye, your lens on life is good, then what you see will likely be good as well. As the saying goes, what we see depends on what we look for. So I want to give a pretty powerful example that can illustrate this point. One of my favorite stories about the Rebbe. Not a very, crazy story, not a very dramatic story, very simple story, but a very powerful one. There was once a Hasidic man who was not a Chabad Chassid. He came to visit the Chabad Rebbe, and he came to request a blessing. So after discussing his personal issue with the Rebbe, the non-Chabad Chassid follower, he asked a question. The Rebbe asked him to repeat to him something that his Rebbe taught him. So he says, that the Rebbe recounted recently that the Talmud states that even the sinners of Israel, even people that are sinners, even the Jews that are sinners, are filled with good deeds as a pomegranate is filled with seeds. And the Rebbe said, it makes no sense. That statement is a contradictory statement. If someone is truly a sinner of Israel, then how can the Talmud say that he's full of good deeds? So the Rebbe closed his eyes and he quietly began to cry. He says, I have the exact same question that your Rebbe had on the same passage of the Talmud. What's my question? My question is that if a Jew that we speak of is truly full of good deeds, then how can he be called a sinner of Israel? His issue wasn't that, how can it be that he's full of good deeds? His issue was, if he's full of good deeds, how can he be a sinner? So this is a classic example of two people looking at the same exact text, identical text, but seeing something entirely different from the text. So this is a very, very powerful story that I think is something that we can all relate to. That at the end of the day is that we see what we're looking for. I don't know if you guys remember, there was quite an image. Maybe I'll even, let's see if I can share it. Let's see. I'm going to try to share it 1 second. I'm on the Zoom. Let's see. Okay. So you guys on Zoom will have the first dibs over here. Let me know what you guys think. What do you see? Either announce it or tell me in the chat box. Tell me what you guys see. Anyone?
Yeah, it could be, but then it's something else too.
What does it look like? Sorry that I will just Let me just show
It
everyone.
looks like a witch. One of them is a very good girl, young girl, and the other is an older witch with a big chin and a big nose. Yep. And they're both wearing a hat.
So I'll tell you.
More than one woman?
Here's the secret. There's two different things here in the same picture. Some people see a young girl. Some people see a very old woman.
I see both of them.
Okay. Now the question is what you saw first.
Young lady.
The question is what you saw first, friend.
Young lady first.
Okay,
Then
good.
I saw the old lady.
So,
I saw a young lady. Young girl first. Young girl. I didn't
Right.
see an old lady.
so
Yeah.
now that I told you that you can see an old lady or you can see a young girl, that's how you can, see both. But if I wouldn't have told you, or before I told you, you'll see that people are only able to see things through their own perspective, and won't even be capable of seeing how others can see things in any other way. It's a very good experiment on how deeply attached we are to our own bias and our subjective view. In fact, there are researchers that found that the expectations of the subjects predicted which image they saw first. Was it the young figure or the old? In other words, what they saw, what people saw, and what you guys saw was directly impacted by a projection of what you guys were looking for. There's an interesting Facebook post from the Humans of New York, which shows a photo of two doctors sitting on a park bench. The caption says, "We are eye doctors." So what's something about that eye that most people don't realize? I'll tell you what. The eye doesn't see. The brain sees. The eye just transmits what the brain sees. So what we see isn't only determined by what comes through the eyes. What we see is affected by our memories, our feelings, and by what we've seen before. In other words, what we see is directly affected by our own default bias, our own lens, for better or for worse. So therefore, it's super important to work on developing, the ability to see God and to see the good in everyone. And this is really the essence of a good eye and the foundation of, of being able to develop a positive bias. And when we view the world in such a way, we will tend to find positive interpretations of events, of experiences, and we'll be able to judge others in the most favorable light. Just like we were studying last week, that the real way to judge judge someone else favorably is to view the world in such a way by letting go of all our preconceived notions by our own bias, and by shifting our bias to become more positive. Every single human being possesses this capacity, this ability for viewing the world in such a way, but achieving it and maintaining it, that's what requires effort. Now, I guess the question after all that, so it sounds all nice and dandy, but while we may be able to see the good in someone or something that's neutral, how do we redeem someone who made their negative presence or intolerance very, very clear? So in the following story, also of the Rebbe, I also want to bring out this point of how to view even the negative people or things in the most positive light. So there was a very famous photographer. His name was Levi Yitzchak Frieden. Levi Yitzchak Frieden, for about 2 decades, he was the photographer for Chabad headquarters at 770 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn. Hi, Deborah. And hi, Sarah, as well. And I see Fran, you're on Facebook as well. Okay. I guess you were on Facebook. So in 1976, he had an exhibit. It was called 770. 770 is the address for the Chabad World Headquarters, and it was at the Tel Aviv Journalist Center, and then it was at Bar Ilan University. And these exhibits gave a very wide range of unaffiliated Jews their first look at the Rebbe and the spirit and the joy of Jewish life that he had. The exhibit was very well received. One journalist though commented very sharply to Levi Yitzchak Frieden in his guest book. He said, with all due respect, to the amazing photography, the subject you have chosen, it's extremely clerical and takes us back to the very dark, takes us back to the darkness of the Middle Ages. So the photographer, brought it back to the Rebbe, and he presented the Rebbe with a guest book. And leafing through it quickly, the Rebbe noticed this negative remark. So the Rebbe said, please compliment the journalist on his strength of character. It takes, a lot of strength to differ from all the other responses. And the Rebbe then concluded with a further positive spin that he told the photographer, said, please tell him that not everything in the Middle Ages was dark. So the Rebbe found a way to positively spin the negative reporter as well as the Middle Ages, which, in many, I guess most people would agree was not very pleasant for our people. So this is, another example of the Rebbe taking a positive spin on a negative comment from a reporter, and at least seemingly a pretty dark era in the Middle Ages. The Rebbe was able to spin that and look at it positively. One more example was when there was someone who opened an organization that was started by Chabad, and he opened his own organization because he got, mixed into some politics of something. One person, part of the organization, it wasn't a Chabad. Chabad was part of the organization. It was an Orthodox, and he made a branch, a break-off organization. So one of the leaders of this original organization was very frustrated, because the guy was taking donors. He was taking, donations from the original group, and he actually was not a Chabad guy, the manager of this organization, and he was appalled by this rival leader's, politically motivated action. And despite clear evidence, the rabbi in question, who opened the new organization, denied being involved with, forming this new organization, etc. Anyhow, so the manager consulted with the Rebbe and told him the story. And he asked the Rebbe, how can the rabbi put politics before principles? So the Rebbe responded, he says, there's a very famous Talmudic discussion that the discussion goes that a king or a high priest are disqualified from serving as a member of any judicial panel that establishes leap years. In the Jewish calendar, the way it works is that some years have 12 months, some years have 13 months, because we are not going based on the solar calendar, we're on the lunar calendar. So why can a king or a high priest qualify as a member of a judicial panel that establishes leap years? So the Talmudic discussion goes that the king has a vested interest in whether a year has 12 or 13 months because he pays his soldiers the wages by the year, which means that the treasury will gain money when a year has 13 months. And he said similarly, the high priest has also a vested interest because he has to immerse in the mikvah, in the ritual bath 5 times throughout Yom Kippur. And before, modern heating methods, he can be partial to a calendar that places that day of Yom Kippur in warmer weather. And the Rebbe says this is the same exact thing with human nature, that we're all prone to subconscious calculation of self-interest, whether we know it or not. Even a Jewish king and a high priest are subject to this, subconscious self-interest. So the Rebbe then reminded the manager of this organization that the rabbi he was judging from his conduct had been the leader of a large community and a yeshiva in Europe that was completely wiped out during the Holocaust, and now he was just trying to, establish this organization in New York, and he was dependent on certain donors, and this is all he has. So can you blame him for wanting to ensure the success of his important work at all costs? So think about it. The Rebbe knew, and the Rebbe was, very much invested in this, for this first organization. And the Rebbe not only put a positive spin on the rabbi's tactics, but he acknowledged the rabbi's status by citing a Talmudic discussion, about the figures of the most honored positions, a Jewish king and the high priest. And this is even though this was, directly impacted the work of Chabad, directly impacted the work of the Rebbe managed to find a positive and a redemptive way to view even those who were seeking to undermine his work. one final point that I think we'll end off with is that the Rebbe also taught many times that through, Mitch, that through doing such a thing, through having such a bias, a positivity bias, not only what we look for affect what we see in others, but what we look for in others affects how the other people can see themselves. When we see positive in others, we actually reveal those positive aspects of the others and enable that person to capitalize on those positive aspects and strengths and use them to overcome whatever weakness or flaw they may have. If you change the way you look at people, then the people you look at change. There's one beautiful example. I think some of you may have seen the video, but a very powerful short story that this guy, his name was Shelley Bear, and he said he was a young kid at a yeshiva in Brooklyn. This was in the 60s. And shortly before his 10th birthday, he went together with his mother and his baby sister, and they went to see the Rebbe. And they went to 770 for a private audience with the Rebbe, and they began to talk to the Rebbe. And his mother started saying that, my son Shalom, my son Shelley, was thrown out of all the yeshivas. His teacher says he's not listening. The rabbis are complaining that he doesn't like school, he doesn't like homework, doesn't like the program. He likes eating stuff in class. And he says that his mother was crying and crying because she was searching for answers. So the Rebbe turned to Shelley, to Shalom, and he smiled and he says, "Come here." So Shelley says, "I was ready for this conversation. I've met tons of rabbis." So he says to the Rebbe, "You're the Rebbe?" So the Rebbe looked at him with a big smile and he says, "Are you a good boy?" So he says, "Nope, I'm not a good boy." So, he was used to this scene. This wasn't the first time he was asked this question. The Rebbe then asked, "Do you like school, Shelley?" "Nope." He says, "Do you listen to your mother?" "Nope." So with a big smile, the Rebbe turned to his mother and he says, emes. He tells the truth. Emes is good. Emes means truth. He says, "Wow, what a beautiful thing that he's telling the truth." And Shelley concluded that this was the moment, the point that pulled him right back into Judaism. Here was a rebellious child looking for a good fight, and then all of a sudden, all that resistance melted away the moment he met someone who saw him, who saw his innocence. The truth behind all his, troublemaking. Someone who defined him by his soul rather than his defiant spirit. So when we're, showing when we're shown our essential goodness and inner truth, we begin to see the same in ourselves. And then we begin to act upon it. So I think it's a very, very important thing that not only does it help us view people, it helps the people you're viewing to change the way they view themselves. I don't know what time it is to know. We're already late. There are a lot of more stories. There are many more stories on this topic, but we'll keep it to this. This is something that we can talk about many, many, many hours about the positivity bias that we can train ourselves to have. And I wish every single one of you, each and every one of you, to train yourself to have a good eye, develop a good eye, develop an eye for seeing people in the most positive way, and to let go of all the previous, subconscious self-interest that we have toward others. So l'chaim to that. I hope to see you all next Tuesday, same time, same place. And hope that one of these Tuesdays already we'll be out of here and we'll be able to do this in person. So good to see you all.